You ever have one of those moments where the universe just mocks you? Not with something huge, like a meteor strike or a financial audit, but with something so small, so utterly petty that it snaps whatever tenuous grip you had on suburban tranquility? That was me. Last Tuesday, I was on the couch, 2 hours deep into a terrible binge watch, something involving forensic dentists, don't ask, when I heard it. A faint, grating scuff. Now in the suburbs, silence is the default setting. A scuff is a seismic event. It means something that shouldn't be moving is. I peeled myself off the sectional, slow-motion style, like a guy in a horror movie who totally deserves to die. I padded over to the front window, pulled back the edge of the Venetian blind, and there he was. Chad. Or maybe Kyle. One of the twins from 2 doors down. He was 17, wearing the universal uniform of youthful idiocy, a hoodie and an expression of profound boredom, and he was squatting down next to my prized garden gnome. Not just a garden gnome. This was Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald was a custom piece. I'd spent $40 on the gnome itself, and another $100 paying a local art student to paint him in full 17th century naval regalia, complete with a tiny, ridiculous monocle. He was majestic, he was unique. And Chad, Kyle, had his grubby, juvenile hands all over him. I banged on the glass, yelling something unintelligible involving words that shouldn't be used in front of my neighbor's prize-winning roses. The kid, startled, didn't drop Sir Reginald. No, he tucked him under one arm like a football, and bolted. Just booked it across my perfectly manicured HOA-compliant fescue, disappearing behind the towering fortress of the Johnson's ornamental shrubs. My initial feeling wasn't loss. It was pure, unadulterated violation. The audacity! The sheer nerve! This wasn't just theft. It was a brazen, territorial pissing contest. I felt exposed. My house, my fortress, was compromised, and some kid in a cheap hoodie had done it. I dropped the blinds. Screw aesthetics. Screw the HOA. I needed eyes on my perimeter, and I needed them to be digital and unblinking. I immediately grabbed the phone and called the first 5-star security company I could find. Yeah, hi, my name's Mark. I need 4 high-res, night vision, military-grade cameras installed, I said, my voice vibrating with righteous anger. And I need them yesterday. Can you do the install tomorrow morning? The rep, clearly used to domestic lunatics, calmly replied, "We can schedule you for 9 a.m., sir." 9 a.m., perfect, I hissed. Prepare for war. 9 a.m. the next day. The sun was out, the coffee was hot, and my mood was bordering on evangelical. The installer, a cheerful guy named Manny, pulled up in a van that looked like it could withstand a small hurricane. He brought the gear, 4 sleek, black, beautiful eyes that were going to stare down every potential gnome thief in a 3-block radius. I felt a surge of security I hadn't experienced since I double-locked the cabinet containing my good bourbon. Manny had already set up his ladder and was about to drill the first hole near the garage when I heard the sound that strikes fear into the heart of every American homeowner. The crisp, determined click of sensible heels on asphalt. I didn't even have to look. I knew. It was Brenda. Brenda is the HOA vice president, and she doesn't just walk, she patrols. She's got the severe silver bob, the perpetual expression of someone smelling old milk, and she wields a clipboard like Excalibur. She didn't knock on the door or walk across the lawn. She stopped exactly at the property line, hovering over my curb like a vulture waiting for a squirrel to expire. I sighed, downed the rest of my lukewarm coffee, and went out to meet my doom. Good morning, Brenda, I said, leaning casually against the doorframe, trying to project relaxed homeowner and not man about to commit felony camera installation. She didn't return the greeting. She didn't even look at me first. Her eyes were fixed on Manny's ladder, scanning it for compliance violations. "Mr. Harmon," she began, her voice the vocal equivalent of scraping fingernails on a chalkboard, "I observe unauthorized installation activity commencing on the exterior facade of your dwelling." I tried the reasonable approach, the one that never, ever works. "Oh, that's just Manny. I'm having a small security system installed. Had a spot of trouble with a gnome thief, you see." I even gave a little chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. Brenda remained motionless. She flipped open the clipboard, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at a specific line of microscopic text. "The Architectural Review Committee, per CC&R Rule 3.4.C," she recited robotically, "specifically prohibits the installation or maintenance of exterior electronic surveillance equipment visible from the street." "But why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "This is for safety. There was a literal crime committed here 24 hours ago." "The rationale," she stated, as if reading from a teleprompter etched onto her brain, "is aesthetics and neighborhood homogeneity. Such devices are deemed visually disruptive and detract from the community's established character." Established character? I threw my hands up. "The established character is a bunch of rich people with perfect lawns. Nobody cares about homogeneity, except the person who wrote this rule. Was it you, Brenda? Did you write a rule banning cameras because you can't afford the night vision ones?" She ignored the rhetorical assault. "If the equipment is installed, Mr. Harmon, a formal violation will be issued, incurring a $50 per day fine until removal is effected." She slapped the clipboard shut. "Consider this your initial verbal warning, effective immediately." She turned on her sensible heel and clicked away, never looking back. I watched her go, then looked at Manny, who was halfway down his ladder, holding a camera like it was a live grenade. "Guess I should pack up, huh?" he asked, scratching his head. "Yeah, Manny," I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Pack it up. The cameras are staying in the box. The Suburban Aesthetics Police have won the first engagement." I was left with a gnomeless front yard, a simmering, focused fury, and 4 boxes of high-res security equipment that were now nothing more than very expensive paperweights. That night was dedicated to one thing, and one thing only: revenge. But not the messy, amateur kind. I needed legal revenge. I needed to weaponize bureaucracy against the bureaucrats. I grabbed the HOA handbook, the CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, that glorious, massive tomb of suburban madness. It's about the size of a phone book, if phone books still existed, and is written in a language only lawyers who secretly hate people can truly understand. I sprawled out on my floor, surrounded by takeout containers and highlighters, turning the pages of that cursed document. Rule 1.1 F. No mailboxes with excessive ornamentation, i.e., anything depicting a cartoon animal or a sports team logo. My annotation: they hate joy. Rule 2.8 B. All exterior paint colors must be selected from the Neutral Harmony palette, specifically shades 01 through 047. My annotation: 47 shades of beige. Pure genius. I was halfway through landscaping and approved vertical elements, feeling my blood pressure rise with every mention of maximum hedge height when I hit the jackpot. I found the original Rule 3.4.C, the one Brenda quoted. No exterior electronic surveillance equipment visible from the street. I read it 6 times. Then I read the definitions section. Electronic surveillance equipment, defined as any device utilizing an electrical current, battery power, or solar energy for the purpose of capturing, recording, or transmitting visual or audio data. And that was it. The beautiful, elegant, gaping hole in their fortress of conformity. The rule specifically says electronic surveillance equipment. It says nothing, absolutely nothing, about human surveillance. The difference between an object and a person. The difference between equipment and an employee. A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. This wasn't just a loophole. It was a black hole of legal semantics, and I was about to jump right into it. This ceased being about Sir Reginald, or even safety, about 3 seconds after I realized the rule didn't cover a dude in a uniform. This was about making a point so large, so ludicrous, so profoundly compliant yet entirely non-compliant in spirit, that the HOA would spontaneously combust from the sheer cognitive dissonance. I realized this was going to cost me a fortune. It was going to be the most expensive, utterly ridiculous statement I had ever made in my life. And it was going to be glorious. The cameras stayed in the box. I was done with the machines. I needed a man, a professional, paid, flesh and blood, non-electronic human being to stand guard on my lawn 24/7. The next day, I didn't call a security company. I called a specialty employment agency. They usually deal with executive protection or event security, not suburban spite projects. The conversation was already fantastic. So you need a guard 24/7 for a static residential post? The agency rep, a man named Chet who sounded permanently confused, asked. Static, yes, but also dynamic, I clarified. It's complicated, Chet. I need a permanent residential security presence, a PRSP, and he must be non-electronic. Non-electronic? Yes. No cell phone, no walkie-talkie, no digital camera, no smartwatch, no Bluetooth earpiece. Ideally, he should operate on clockwork or pure spite, I said. I opened my laptop and started drafting the job description, a masterful blend of bureaucratic jargon and pure comedy. Job title, Permanent Residential Security Presence, PRSP. Non-electronic visual deterrent. Specialist location. Upscale, aesthetically aggressive suburban environment, USA. Objective, maintain uninterrupted, high-profile, curb-facing patrol to ensure maximum compliance with local architectural and surveillance codes while providing an irrefutable, fully organic deterrent against minor property offenses, gnome theft, mail tampering, excessive aesthetic conformity. Key responsibilities. Maintenance of a professional, motionless, and aesthetically pleasing posture at all times, except during scheduled compliance protocols. Must be dressed in a uniform selected from the neutral harmony palette. No loud stripes, no reflective material, no tactical gear. Must utilize only non-electronic, analog tools for record-keeping and time management. Clipboard, mechanical pencil, mechanical stopwatch. Must possess strong internal monologue skills, as external communication must be limited to essential contractual interactions. Must be a natural deterrent, not an appliance. Must be legally distinct from exterior electronic surveillance equipment. Required skills. Expert-level stamina for prolonged standing. Ironclad bladder control. Familiarity with the legal nuances of CC&R Rule 3.4c. Must project an aura of unblinking existential dread. Compensation. Highly competitive, given the unique, high-stakes, purely spite-driven nature of the assignment. I sent that masterpiece to Chet. He didn't call back for an hour. When he finally did, his voice was flat. "Mr. Harmon, I've been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen a job description that mentions a clockwork mechanism or an aura of existential dread." "Chet, the pay is excellent," I reminded him. "Just send me the 3 most boring, most professional applicants you have. I need compliance, not Rambo." He agreed reluctantly. The conversations I had with the candidates over the next 2 days were truly the gifts that kept on giving. This was going to be even better than I thought. The interviews were conducted in my living room while I sat there with my copy of the CCNRs open on the coffee table. I was vetting these men not just for their security skills, but for their ability to withstand the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of suburban passive aggression. First up was a guy named Bryce. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a G.I. Joe commercial. "Mr. Harmon, let me tell you, I'm your man," Bryce boomed, vibrating with nervous energy. He was wearing a shirt with a patch that said, "Mall security. You can run, but you'll only walk fast." "Great, Bryce. Now the uniform requirements are strict. Neutral colors only. No visible electronics." "Got it," he said, pulling up his sleeve to reveal a watch the size of a dinner plate. "It's a tactical solar-charged chronograph. Can track GPS, atmospheric pressure, and the exact rotation of the Earth. If a gnome thief approaches, I hit this button, and it sends a pre-recorded message to my non-electronic clipboard." "No, absolutely not," I interrupted, trying not to laugh. "It uses solar power. It's electronic surveillance equipment by definition." "And Bryce, is that a leash I see?" He proudly held up a leather lead. "This is for my partner, Rex. Rex is a K9 unit, highly trained to deter loitering and excessive speed walking. He's mostly shepherd, mostly calm." "You want to bring a dog that's mostly calm onto an HOA-regulated property where the complaint is already about intimidation. And dogs are definitely an accessory, which is not approved under Rule 5.1a. "But Rex is an aesthetic enhancement," he pleaded. "Rex is a biological weapon, Bryce." Next was a young man named Leo. He was wearing a slightly stained black turtleneck and carried a worn copy of Foucault. "Mr. Harmon," Leo said, leaning forward intensely, "I see this role not as security, but as a crucial commentary on the pervasive surveillance culture of late capitalism." "Right. That's great, Leo. Can you stand still for 12 hours without blinking?" "The lack of blinking is intentional. It represents the soulless, automated eye of the system. My very presence will be a performance piece, the gaze of compliance." "That's aggressive. The HOA wants less aggression." "But the humor, sir. Imagine, I wear a traditional mime costume. The white face, the striped shirt, a silent protest against the restrictions of speech and expression imposed by the bourgeois property owners. Leo, if you show up here dressed as a mime, the HOA won't fine me. They'll institutionalize me. And the mime's nonverbal communication might be interpreted as unapproved dramatic performance under the entertainment clause. We need boring, Leo. We need beige, professional, and slightly depressing. So, no commentary on the post-structuralist nature of lawn maintenance. He sighed dramatically. Not one word. Thanks for your time, Leo. Then there was Gary. Gary was mid-40s, built like a fire hydrant, and moved with the silent efficiency of an iceberg. He wore a crisp, black uniform, unbranded, unadorned, utterly professional. His shoes looked like they could survive a trek across the surface of the moon. He didn't shake my hand. He offered a brief, respectful nod. He sat down, pulled out a small, non-electronic, leather-bound notepad and a pencil, and waited. "Gary," I started, trying to gauge his energy. "You read the job description? The non-electronic visual deterrent specialist part?" "Yes, sir," he said, his voice a low, even baritone that suggested he never got excited, angry, or even mildly amused. "I understand the need for human observation where technological means are restricted. And the 24/7 requirement. You realize you'll be standing on a lawn, essentially being a highly paid, slightly confused-looking garden statue?" "I am trained in prolonged static observation," he confirmed. "My previous contracts included guarding sensitive, high-value assets with minimal visual interference. A suburban lawn fits the criteria for high-value asset, given the emotional investment you clearly have in this matter." I blinked. He saw right through the gnome incident and into my soul. I loved it. "I need you to confirm, Gary. Do you carry any form of electronic surveillance equipment on your person?" He paused, then slowly pulled out his wallet and showed me his ID. "This is government mandated. It may contain a chip. Other than that, I possess a mechanical wristwatch, a pen, a pencil, and this pad." He placed the pad on the table. "I follow the contract. I am a highly trained observer. I do not constitute equipment." That last line, it was robotic, legally watertight, and delivered with the deadpan perfection of a man who truly understood the assignment. "Gary," I said, a massive grin splitting my face. "You're hired. When can you start?" "My shift begins in 2 hours, sir. I'll just need confirmation on the HOA-compliant uniform colors." I had found my weapon. The setup was everything. I felt like a general orchestrating a non-violent, deeply passive-aggressive military operation. First, I had to deal with the logistics of a 24/7 human sentry. Gary would work 12-hour shifts, and his counterpart, a man named Dave, who had Gary's same unsettling professional stillness, would cover the other half. I insisted they both maintain the same uniform: dark, neutral gray trousers, black shoes, and a light gray button-down shirt, the absolute essence of "can't complain about the color." Next, the chair. The CC&Rs had entire subsections dedicated to exterior furniture and accent pieces. I found the perfect piece, a high-end, ergonomic, outdoor director's chair in a shade called Dust Bunny White, HOA approved, 045. I bought it, then placed it precisely 2 feet from my curb. Gary arrived for his first shift right on time. He didn't drive up. He simply materialized from around the corner, clipboard in hand, looking like a monument to professional restraint. I met him on the driveway. "Gary, welcome to the front lines," I said, trying to be inspiring. He nodded once. "My post is established, sir." "Right. Now, here's the actual contract, Gary. The one that matters. The one that will drive the HOA insane." I held up the CC&Rs. "Rule number 1. You are visible. Always. Day, night, rain, shine. You are a presence. You are a deterrent." "Understood," he confirmed. "Rule number 2. You are non-electronic. If you need to make notes, you use the pad. If you need to know the time, you use the mechanical watch." "My timepiece is fully operational," he stated. "Rule number 3. If you see a crime, and I mean a real crime, not a gnome snatching, you call me first, on the provided landline, which I will answer 24/7. Then you call the police." "Why the intermediary step, sir?" "Because," I explained, leaning in conspiratorially. If you call the police directly, it implies the HOA's rules are inadequate for maintaining security, which gives them grounds to change the rules. If I call the police based on your observation, it's just a homeowner reporting an event based on information from his legally employed human resource. It keeps the battle purely procedural. Gary tilted his head fractionally. A sound tactical approach. I am a professional human deterrent, Mark, not a first responder. Understood. And rule number 4, Gary, the most important one. Do not sit in the chair. The chair is an accent piece. You are a visual deterrent. You must stand next to the chair, constantly implying that you could sit down, but choose not to, for reasons of high vigilance. Gary nodded, turned, and took his position. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, facing the street. The director's chair stood empty beside him, a perfect symbol of unearned rest. The neighborhood quickly devolved into absolute chaos. Not shouting chaos, but the much worse suburban whispering chaos. I watched from my window, cackling internally, as the first dog walker did a full, bewildered stop. Then came Mrs. Henderson, the neighborhood gossip queen, walking her ancient poodle. She stopped dead, yanked the poodle back, and started whispering furiously into her cell phone, all while Gary remained perfectly still, radiating silent menace. I saw Mr. Peterson nearly drive his Tesla into a recycling bin because he was staring so hard. The mail carrier, who usually just tosses the flyers onto the driveway, actually paused, walked up to the post box, and slipped the mail in with a nervous glance at Gary. Later that afternoon, a pair of teenagers, probably looking for Sir Reginald's replacement, walked past. They stopped, looked at Gary, shrugged, and walked on. Then they stopped again, backed up 50 feet, and stared. Gary didn't move a muscle. The teenagers retreated, clearly defeated by the uncanny stillness of a paid professional. I heard one, neighbor, a guy named Tom, talking to his wife as they passed. "Is he a statue?" Tom asked in a stage whisper. "Tom, he just scratched his nose. No, he's a person." My internal response, as I sipped a truly excellent glass of iced tea. Yes, a highly compliant statue that accepts a substantial hourly wage, Tom. And wait until Brenda sees this. Brenda, of course, saw it. You don't miss a 6-foot, perfectly stationary man in a neutral uniform standing watch over a suburban lawn. It's the visual equivalent of a bomb going off, but in slow motion and in a subtle, HOA-approved shade of gray. The next day, she drove by 4 times. Not speed limit driving. Slow, deliberate passes, her head whipping around. She was analyzing. She was scheming. She was trying to fit this square peg into the circular hole of her rule book. And I knew she was failing miserably. Finally, the inevitable arrived at 4:30 p.m. It wasn't Gary who accepted the notice. It was me. Brenda marched right up to my door, handed me a crisp, lavender-colored envelope, and didn't wait for a response. I tore it open. Violation Notice 4.2a. Unapproved commercial activity. The presence of a uniformed, non-resident individual maintaining a continuous vigil on the exterior premises constitutes an unsanctioned commercial enterprise and a clear attempt to operate an unapproved business, security firm branch, within a residential zone. I snorted. Unsanctioned commercial enterprise. They were grasping at straws made of beige twine. My reply was immediate and equally bureaucratic, but laced with my signature snark. I typed it up, printed it on official-looking letterhead, and mailed it back within the hour. My reply: Dear Architectural Review, Committee, I received your notice regarding unapproved commercial activity. I must respectfully and unequivocally deny this claim. The individual in question, Mr. Gary Peterson, is a highly dedicated, long-term, live-in house guest who has chosen, as part of his personal wellness regimen, to practice continuous, open-air, standing meditation for health and spiritual reasons. His attire is merely his preferred style of athletic wear. He is not exchanging money for his presence. I am happy to provide complimentary lodging and meals to my long-term guests. He is certainly not operating a security firm. He is merely achieving a state of advanced, focused stillness. Furthermore, I enclose a photograph of Mr. Peterson maintaining his standing meditation posture. As you can see, he is a figure of profound tranquility, fully compliant with the Atmosphere of Peace and Quiet clause of Rule 1.9. B. Please retract. Violation 4.2. A. Immediately. If you require further documentation on the benefits of standing meditation, please advise. Sincerely, Mark Harmon, Tranquil Resident. I made sure to include a high-quality professional photo of Gary standing there, stoic as a Greek column, radiating compliance. The game was on. The silence from the HOA lasted exactly 48 hours. Then, the next notice arrived, carried by a different, clearly embarrassed HOA member. Not Brenda, but poor, timid Carol, who looked like she wanted to apologize with her entire body. They didn't try to dispute the live-in house guest practicing meditation claim. They went straight for a rule amendment. Bureaucracy is a persistent beast. When you win one round, it just prints new rules. The notice was a printed amendment to the CCNRs, effective immediately. Rule 4.2b. No single non-resident individual may occupy exterior property space for more than 4 continuous hours without proof of active, documented yard maintenance or recreational activity. This was brilliant in its evil. They knew Gary stood still. If he stood still for more than 4 hours, he was violating the new rule. If he was actively maintaining the yard, he had to be cutting grass or weeding, which a professional guard wouldn't do. They boxed me in. They underestimated my dedication to petty revenge, and Gary's dedication to his contract. I immediately called Gary, on the landline, of course. They amended the rules, Gary. 4 continuous hours maximum stillness. What say you? Sir, my contract specifies 12 hours of uninterrupted observation. Then we amend the contract, I declared triumphantly. You are no longer maintaining a static vigil. You are performing the quarter-hourly constitutional compliance patrol. I explained the plan, and Gary listened with the rapt attention of a man hearing the blueprint for the ultimate tax evasion scheme. The next day, the entire neighborhood, including Brenda, who was now sitting in her BMW across the street, watching with binoculars, witnessed the birth of the patrol. Gary, still wearing his neutral gray uniform, stood at attention. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a faint, high-pitched chirp came from his breast pocket. It was his non-electronic analog stopwatch. He didn't twitch. He didn't look down. He just executed a precise 3-step loop. 1. One deliberate, measured step to the left. 2. One deliberate, measured step to the right, returning to center. 3. One deliberate, measured step backward, and then one forward. This constituted a total of 4 steps and a movement of approximately 18 inches. Then, he performed a slight repositioning of his clipboard. He moved it from his right hand to his left. Total time elapsed. 7 seconds. He was now actively moving and documenting his activity, which qualified as documented maintenance of the curb line's integrity if pressed. He was no longer in continuous 4-hour stillness. He was in a state of continuous 15-minute rule-compliant micromotion. Brenda's BMW nearly reversed into a tree. I watched her put the binoculars down, pick up her phone, and start angrily texting. The absurdity was escalating beautifully. The neighbors were, once again, baffled. I saw kids trying to time his movements, and an elderly woman almost tripped because she thought he was glitching. I had effectively turned my guard into a highly regulated, semi-automated machine, all without using a single watt of electricity. He was a human robot, programmed by the HOA rules themselves, and he was beautiful. I received another notice later that day, a warning about repeated and excessive pedestrian traffic within the frontage easement. My reply: Mr. Peterson is merely calibrating his observation position to account for the Earth's daily rotation. This is necessary for accurate documentation and constitutes documented activity. If the HOA wishes to argue against the laws of physics, please cite the appropriate CC&R amendment. I had them. They had created a rule that forced him to move, and now he was moving just enough to drive them insane. The next step in the inevitable HOA war of attrition was the emergency board meeting. I received a certified letter demanding my presence to discuss persistent violations and the intrusive presence on Lot 14. I decided to bring Gary, not to speak, that would violate his stoicism, but purely as a silent, physical exhibit of compliance. The meeting was held in the poorly lit basement of the community clubhouse, smelling vaguely of stale coffee and crushed dreams. The entire board was there. Brenda, vice president, Mr. Jenkins, treasurer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Mrs. Gable, secretary, who just wanted to talk about her prize-winning petunias. I walked in, followed by Gary, who immediately took up a silent, unmoving station against the wall, clipboard ready. I sat down, leaning back comfortably. Brenda opened the proceedings, her voice tight with contained fury. "Mr. Harmon," she began, her eyes darting nervously to Gary, who was currently radiating an intense, professional neutrality. "We are here to discuss the unapproved presence you have maintained on your property for the last 72 hours. With all due respect, Brenda, I haven't maintained an unapproved presence. I have merely housed a long-term guest whose personal wellness routine involves standing meditation and precise, quarter-hourly positional calibration, which, I note, is now compliant with the new 4.2b amendment. Thank you for clarifying that rule, by the way. It was most helpful." Mr. Jenkins coughed weakly. Brenda plowed on, switching targets. "We find the individual intimidating. His constant, unblinking presence is causing distress and concern among residents." I smiled, wide and friendly. "Intimidation? Ma'am, he's a professional observer. Intimidation is a subjective emotion, not a breach of contract. If I find your Paisley blazer intimidating, should I file a complaint under the excessive patterning clause? No, I wouldn't, because feelings aren't facts, and certainly aren't CC&Rs. She slammed her hand on the table. "He is always standing there. He is not moving. He is a statue." "Ah, but he is moving," I countered, pulling out a copy of the new rule, 4.2b. "He moves every 15 minutes. I have the log of his positional calibrations here, documented on his non-electronic clipboard, signed and verified." I dramatically waved the document. He is engaging in documented activity every 15 minutes, thus resetting the 4-hour clock. He is constantly compliant. Brenda's eye twitched. This is a deliberate mockery of our covenant. It is a deliberate adherence to the exact letter of your covenant, I corrected her cheerfully. The rule says no exterior electronic surveillance equipment. I provided a human. You lost this round when you confused a man with a coaxial cable. Now, if you want to ban humans, you'll have to amend the covenant again to include Homo sapiens, male, uniformed, stoic, and I suggest you run that by a lawyer first. Mrs. Gable, the secretary, piped up nervously. Perhaps if the uniform was a different color, Mark, something less dark? The uniform, I announced, turning to Gary, who stood statue still, is strictly within the neutral harmony palette, as dictated by my internal guidelines, which are based on your approved shades 040 through 047. It is black and gray. It is professional. It is boring. It is compliant. Brenda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We know what this is, Mr. Harmon. You want cameras. You are attempting to subvert the established rules by creating an untenable situation that forces us to concede your cameras. That is a fascinating theory, Brenda, but I'm just employing a house guest who likes to stand up a lot, I said, shrugging. Unless you have a rule banning long-term, standing house guests, I believe the meeting is concluded. Gary, without instruction, took one deliberate step forward, performed a slight, non-aggressive adjustment of his collar, and took one deliberate step back, initiating his quarter-hourly constitutional compliance patrol, right there in the HOA basement. The board stared at him. The message was clear. I am compliant. Deal with it. Mr. Jenkins finally spoke. Brenda, we can't fine him if he's not violating an existing rule. He's found a loophole, and until we draft an amendment that covers human resources utilized as aesthetic counter-aggression, we have no grounds. I stood up. Exactly. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Gary, let's go. As we walked out, I gave Brenda a final, triumphant smirk. The board was defeated, but not broken. I knew this was just the beginning of their escalation. The next notice, delivered the following morning, was a masterpiece of absurdity. They had clearly spent all night drafting this one, bypassing the human issue entirely and focusing instead on the look. Violation Notice 5.1.b. Excessive uniformity of lawn ornamentation and visual deterrence. The continuous, unchanging nature of the individual's attire and physical presence constitutes a form of visual obstruction that deviates significantly from the welcoming, low-deterrence aesthetic established by the community. The uniform is deemed too uniform, creating a psychological barrier and thus visual deterrent. I read it 3 times. Too uniform. I was fined because my professional human was too professional. This was glorious. I called Chet at the security agency. Chet, they just fined me because Gary's uniform is too uniform and creates an excessive visual deterrence. I need a professional decorator. A decorator? For a security guard? Chet sounded like he was moments away from quitting the entire security industry. Yes, someone who can jazz up the uniform within the confines of his company's existing color regulations. I need compliance with a dash of whimsy, but not mime whimsy. I hired a freelance fashion consultant named Celeste. She arrived at my house 30 minutes later, looking skeptical, but willing to take my money. Celeste looked at Gary, who was performing his 9:45 a.m. compliance shuffle. I'm sorry, but what is the core mission here? Celeste asked, adjusting her oversized artistic glasses. The core mission, I explained, is to make him look less intimidating and more decorative. He must remain professional, but he must also cease being excessively uniform. Can you manage that while staying within the gray-black palette? Celeste circled Gary slowly, treating him like a particularly stubborn mannequin. The lapel is too sharp. The shirt is too starched. It suggests intent. Intent is bad. Compliance is good. Right, okay. I can't change the clothes, but I can change the accessories. We'll introduce texture. A slight, approved shade of coastal mist piping on the collar. It's OR46, so it's compliant. We'll use a decorative badge. Not a security badge, but a bespoke, stylized observer crest. Silver but slightly matte. And the shoes are too shiny. We scuff the shine to a low, aesthetically non-threatening luster. I grinned. Celeste, you're a genius. You're turning him from a sentry into a highly disciplined, artistic installation piece. He's a visual metaphor for the erosion of privacy through mandated conformity, she declared. Sure, Celeste. Just make him look less aggressive, please. Celeste went to work. She couldn't actually touch Gary. That would violate the contract. So she worked on a spare uniform, adding the compliant piping and the decorative badge. Gary changed into the modified uniform during his 1-hour, off-site, non-continuous break. When he returned, Gary was still Gary. Stoic, still, and professional. But now, he had a tiny, silver-piped collar and a badge that looked vaguely like a corporate logo for a minimalist Scandinavian furniture company. He looked less like a threat and more like a very serious, very well-paid butler who forgot his tray. I sent the HOA a photograph of the newly jazzed-up Gary, along with a detailed invoice from Celeste, and a letter arguing that the new piping and badge constitute a decorative modification, thus nullifying the claim of excessive uniformity. The fine was immediately put on hold pending review. I was winning the war of paper, one ridiculous rule at a time. At this point, I wasn't the weird guy who lost his gnome. I was the neighborhood anti-hero. Gary wasn't just my guard. He was the local legend. People were stopping by, not to complain, but to witness the spectacle of bureaucracy fighting a losing battle against sheer, funded absurdity. The bets were getting serious. People were betting on how long it would take the HOA to give up, what Brenda would cite next, and whether Gary had ever blinked. The consensus was no. He was an unblinking analog machine. The compliant gifts started showing up. Mrs. Henderson, the poodle woman, brought Gary a non-electronic, antique, high-quality thermos, filled with what I assume was artisanal coffee. She left it on his empty director's chair and scurried off. A kid from down the street drew a chalk outline around Gary's official standing zone. Gary performed his compliance patrol, carefully stepping in and out of the chalk lines every 15 minutes. The neighbors cheered. I was outside, watering my grass, HOA-mandated daily schedule, naturally, when my next-door neighbor Steve walked over. "Mark, I gotta hand it to you," Steve whispered, looking over his shoulder toward Brenda's house. "You've completely lost your mind." "It's a small price to pay for Sir Reginald's memory, Steve," I replied, adjusting the spray nozzle. "No, I mean, the dedication. That guy, Gary, he's been there for 4 days. 4 days! What's he doing?" "He's observing. He's deterring. He's constitutionally complying. And he's costing me about $3,000 a week." Steve's eyes widened. $3,000? You're paying $3,000 a week to make Brenda cry. Not cry, Steve. Just frustrated. Professionally frustrated. That's the goal. Steve slapped me on the shoulder. Listen, I just want to thank you. Last night, the HOA sent me a notice about my flower bed being 3 inches too close to the sidewalk. I filed a counterclaim citing your right to existential presence defense. They backed off immediately. I smiled. It's the least I can do. We're fighting the good fight, Steve. One stationary guard at a time. Anyway, the boys are running a pool. We've got Brenda citing you for unapproved shadow length next week. What's your gut tell you? I'm going with excessive proximity to the curb. It's a classic move, I said. The entire neighborhood was now complicit in my private war. The HOA was no longer a terrorizing force. It was a ridiculous obstacle that only existed to be defeated by the power of Gary and the letter of the law. I knew it was only a matter of time before Brenda escalated beyond paperwork and into actual law enforcement. When you're losing a bureaucratic war, you call in the cavalry, even if the cavalry hates your guts. At 2:00 p.m. on a Sayed, Thursday, 2 police cruisers pulled up to my house. Not silently, either. The sirens were off, but they parked diagonally, blocking the street, making a spectacle out of the situation. They were clearly hoping to draw attention. 2 officers got out. One, a veteran cop named Officer Miller, who looked like he'd seen it all and hated most of it. And a rookie, Officer Jenkins, no relation to the HOA guy, thankfully, who looked terrified. I met them at the end of my driveway, trying to maintain a look of helpful innocence. Gary, naturally, remained at his post, motionless, not even adjusting his posture. Officer Miller approached, clipboard in hand. I noted the irony. Mr. Harmon? We received a complaint. Yes, officer, that's usually how these things start, I replied. The complaint is from a resident. She alleges that your employee, Mr. Peterson, is intimidating the neighborhood, engaging in suspicious activity, and maintaining an aggressive posture that constitutes harassment. I almost laughed out loud. Aggressive posture? Officer, that's just Gary's default setting. He's constitutionally compliant, legally employed, and armed only with a clipboard and a mechanical pencil. He's performing his quarter-hourly constitutional compliance patrol, which is required under the community's newest amendment to avoid charges of excessive stillness. The rookie, Jenkins, looked utterly bewildered. Compliance patrol? Yes, I confirmed. It's all about semantics, officer. Now, before we proceed, I want to confirm, is observing one's own property from one's own property a crime in this jurisdiction? Officer Miller rubbed his temples. No, sir, of course not. Is standing still or taking 3 steps to the left every 15 minutes a crime? No? Then I suggest you talk to Gary. He is a highly trained, non-electronic, fully auditable visual deterrent. He will confirm that all his actions are compliant with the letter of the law. Officer Miller sighed and walked over to Gary. The entire interaction was a masterpiece of deadpan humor. Sir, I need to know what you're doing here. Gary looked straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. I am fulfilling my contractual obligation as a permanent residential security presence. I am maintaining uninterrupted, static, non-electronic observation of the surrounding environment. And you're harassing people? Harassment is defined in Section 3.4 of the Penal Code as actions taken with the intent to annoy or alarm. My intent is to deter property crime through visual presence. My posture is professional, not aggressive. Officer Miller turned back to me, defeated. He's got the paperwork. He's a registered security guard. He's not doing anything but standing here. We can't file a report on aggressive posture, Mr. Harmon. Of course not, officer, I said sweetly. Perhaps you should advise the complainant that they are abusing the non-emergency line for a petty neighborhood dispute involving decorative uniform piping." Officer Miller actually cracked a smile, a tiny, tired twitch of his lip. He shook his head slowly. "You know what, Mr. Harmon? I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Keep paying this guy. This is the most beautiful waste of money I've ever seen. But if I get another call, I'm going to fine you for improper use of a human resource." "Fair enough, officer. Have a peaceful, aesthetically compliant day." As the patrol cars drove away, I looked at Gary. He nodded once, a gesture of shared victory. The police were out. The HOA had played its highest card and lost. The police failed. The paperwork failed. Brenda was running out of rules. I decided it was time to pivot to the next, even more absurd phase of the operation: architectural subterfuge. My next goal was to install the cameras, the original point of all this madness, in a way that was technically interior and thus compliant. I needed a building, an HOA-approved building. I drafted architectural plans for the permanent observation gazebo. It was a small octagonal structure, painted in approved shade 003, early morning fog, featuring a single, large, fixed pane of glass facing the street. I submitted the plans to the HOA under the guise of an approved garden structure for recreational contemplation. They approved it instantly, thrilled I was spending money on something they actually did approve of. I hired a small local contractor, Tony, and his crew. Tony arrived with his team, took one look at the spot where Gary was standing, and immediately stopped working. I walked up to Tony, who was standing there scratching his head, staring at Gary. "What's the holdup, Tony?" "Mark, look, I'm a carpenter. I build decks and sheds. I don't ask questions, but I have to ask, who is this guy?" "That," I said, gesturing to Gary, who was currently resetting his 11:30 a.m. compliance stance, "is Gary. He's my permanent residential security presence. He's here to provide non-electronic visual deterrence." "Right. And I'm building him a shed. Is he going to stand in the shed?" "No, Tony. The shed, or gazebo, as we call it in the paperwork, is a stationary decorative structure. Gary stands outside of it, next to his director's chair." Tony pulled off his hard hat and ran a hand through his hair. "So, I'm building a small house for a guy who just stands outside of it?" "It's a legally compliant shelter for a non-electronic visual deterrent, Tony," I patiently explained. "It's all about semantics. The gazebo is not for sitting or sleeping. It's for storing my non-electronic logbooks, my approved sunblock, and eventually a few potted plants." "And the giant window?" "It's for natural light and architectural appeal, nothing more." Tony looked at Gary, then at me, then back at Gary. "The guy won't even talk to me. I offered him a bottle of water. He just shook his head and kept staring." "He's under contract, Tony. Uninterrupted observation is key. He can't break focus." Tony threw his hands up. "Okay, fine. It's the weirdest job I've ever had, and I once built a deck shaped like a giant saxophone. But the money is good. Just promise me this. When I'm done, tell Gary he can use the gazebo if it rains." "I will pass along the message, Tony, but I promise you he won't use it. That would imply he has human needs, which undermines his professional stoicism." Tony just grunted and went to gather his tools. The construction of the permanent observation gazebo began, providing Gary with a perfect, compliant backdrop for his silent vigil. Every hammer swing was a victory punch against Brenda's authority. The observation gazebo was nearing completion. It was handsome, beige, and utterly unnecessary. It was also, crucially, an approved interior space. My cameras were ready. Victory was within sight. But the HOA had one last gasp of desperate fury before they conceded the architectural front. The final inspection came from Brenda herself, armed with a ladder and a pair of professional-grade, high-powered binoculars, ironically more technologically advanced than my proposed original cameras. She climbed the ladder, stood on my driveway, and pointed directly at the roof. "Violation, Mr. Harmon!" she shrieked triumphantly, standing on the third rung. "What is it now, Brenda? Excessive wood grain?" "Shingles! The color of the roof shingles!" she shouted, her voice echoing slightly off the new structure. Rule 6.1.d. All auxiliary structure roofing must match the established primary dwelling tone, specifically coastal fog, 047, or be within 2 degrees of variance. "And what shade did Tony use?" I asked, completely calm. "This," she huffed, pointing, "is driftwood gray. It is a full 4 degrees off-tone and provides an unacceptable visual contrast." I walked over to the construction debris pile, dug around, and found the original shingle wrapper. I pulled out the label and walked back, holding it out for her to see. "Brenda, look closer. Tony is a professional. The box is clearly marked. Driftwood gray. Now, I submit to you that driftwood gray and coastal fog are visually indistinguishable to the naked eye under ambient light." "They are not," she insisted. "The shade is incorrect. It creates a jarring accent piece." "Then you need to prove it," I challenged, raising an eyebrow. "You cited 2 degrees of variance. Are you, perhaps, carrying a certified spectrophotometer on your person, capable of measuring the exact spectral reflectance of the shingle against the primary dwelling?" She went silent. Her face went pale. "I didn't think so," I continued, pressing my advantage. "Until you can produce laboratory-grade, scientific evidence that my approved structural accessory violates a specific, measurable metric that you invented, I refuse to acknowledge the fine. This is simply a matter of human perception, and frankly, my perception is that the gazebo is aesthetically magnificent and perfectly compliant." She stepped down from the ladder, her sensible heels hitting the driveway with a defeated thud. She crumpled the violation notice in her hand. "This isn't over, Mark," she hissed. "I know," I replied cheerfully, "but the gazebo is done, and it's compliant." She stormed off, leaving the crumpled paper on the ground. I bent down, picked it up, and tossed it into the nearest recycling bin. I had defeated the police, the decorator, the contractor's confusion, and now the shingle police. The final phase was now ready. The next day, I didn't get a fine. I got a package. A massive official envelope containing the minutes from an emergency board meeting held at 10:00 p.m. last night, following the shingle debacle. I poured a celebratory coffee and read the document. It was a complete overhaul of the surveillance section. They had clearly thrown a fit of bureaucratic despair. They couldn't ban the man, so they tried to ban the concept. They didn't just ban electronic equipment. They didn't just ban the human. They essentially banned the act of looking. I flipped to the final revision of the CCNRs. New Rule 3.4d, replacing 3.4.c. Effective immediately. All forms of human or non-human, electronic or non-electronic, stationary or mobile, purposeful surveillance, observation, or visual deterrence are hereby prohibited on exterior-facing lots within the community. This includes, but is not limited to, CCTV, trail cameras, binoculars, human lookouts, human deterrence, live-in house guests engaged in standing meditation, decorative badges, and any form of recorded or live visual documentation of the common elements or adjacent lots. I sank back in my chair, sipping my coffee. I wasn't angry. I was ecstatic. They had surrendered. I had forced the entire HOA to amend their bylaws, to ban the very concept of looking at things, all because they couldn't get rid of Gary. I had won the war by driving them to such a state of regulatory mania that their rules were now functionally unconstitutional. I immediately called Gary, who was doing his 1:15 p.m. compliance shuffle. "Gary, it's Mark. I have the new covenant." "Is it compliant, sir?" "No, Gary, it's beautiful. It's a complete ban on all forms of visual deterrence. The war is over. I've won." "Understood, sir. Should I cease observation?" "In 5 minutes, Gary. After the 1:30 p.m. shuffle, we end with compliance." I had spent an insane amount of money, engaged in weeks of ridiculous dialogue, and dealt with a police visit. But I had forced the HOA to ban the very idea of purposeful visual attention just to get rid of my highly compliant human guard. Maximum petty victory achieved. I walked out to the lawn right before 1:30 p.m. to meet Gary. He was performing his final, perfectly timed 3 steps. "That's it, Gary," I said, handing him a check for his final week, plus a substantial bonus. "Your services are officially no longer required, as the very act of observing is now a violation." Gary took the check and folded it precisely into his pocket. He looked at me, and for the first time, I swear, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't professional neutrality. Maybe it was respect, or even, dare I say it, amusement. "It was an honor, Mr. Harmon," he said, his voice flat but sincere. "It was the quietest security job I've ever had, and the most entertaining. You proved a point, that the letter of the law is a dangerous tool when used by an imaginative man. You were the perfect weapon, Gary, the ultimate counter-bureaucracy. Thank you." "The pleasure was mine, sir. You are now exposed, however. Be careful." "I won't be exposed for long," I said, grinning. Gary nodded, turned and walked away, not looking back. He didn't use the director's chair, of course. He was a professional, to the very end. As soon as he was gone, I grabbed my toolbox and walked into the newly finished permanent observation gazebo. It was compliant, approved, and had a large, fixed window facing the street. I pulled out the boxes I'd bought weeks ago. The 4 high-res, night vision, military-grade cameras. I mounted them inside the gazebo, facing out through the window. They were technically pointed at the street, offering perfect visual coverage. They were definitely electronic. They were definitely surveillance equipment. But they were interior to an HOA-approved permanent architectural structure. They were no longer exterior electronic surveillance equipment visible from the street. They were now interior observation equipment, legally permitted. I sealed the window, making them impossible to remove without breaking the gazebo's approved facade. Then, I printed a small, laminated sign and hung it on the inside wall, visible through the glass. Interior observation equipment, legally permitted. I won the battle against surveillance equipment by hiring a man who was then banned, which led to the creation of an interior space that allowed me to finally install the surveillance equipment. The cycle was complete. It was expensive. It was exhausting. I spent more on Gary's salary and Celeste's frivolous decorating fee than I ever would have on fines, lawyers, or the cameras themselves. But it was absolutely worth it. I forced the HOA to amend their bylaws in such a ridiculous, self-defeating way that they now look like a governing body drafted by a confused chimpanzee. And I got my cameras. They're inside the little observation gazebo. Silent, unblinking, and perfectly legal. I can now see everything. If Chad/Kyle ever comes near my lawn again, I'll have 4K proof of his nefarious intentions. And if the HOA ever tries to fight me on the interior equipment rule, I can simply point to the fact that they banned the act of looking in a previous amendment, which they can't possibly enforce. I'm currently watching the live feed. Brenda is driving past right now, staring at the gazebo. She knows the Scheinsen. Cameras are in there. She just can't prove it's illegal. She's stuck. Meanwhile, the HOA is currently trying to figure out if Mrs. Henderson's newly planted petunias are leaning at an unapproved angle. I've moved on. I'm safe. I'm compliant. And my house has the most expensive, most legally convoluted security system in the entire United States of America.